no. It's...
Well, no, that's good. Good evening. My name's Don. I'm an alcoholic. It's a privilege to be here and be sober, and if anybody's new, how weird is this, huh? If you had nothing better to do than come and hang out with a few hundred of my friends, there's something seriously wrong with your life. And for that, we have a solution. We're going to talk about that. So my story starts out that I swear I was never quite right. My family moved around a lot. I was always on the outside looking in. I could lose my confidence in just a blink of an eye. And then in my teenage years, I found alcohol, and all of a sudden I fit. I fit really well. But soon I had a new problem, and that was finding out the guys that I partied with, because the guys my age couldn't hang. It was usually a little rougher, tougher, a little older crowd, and I'd be hanging out with those guys, and we'd be living the dream, and we'd be talking smack about the guys down the road that were a little worse, This is great, but I'm never going to be like them. And so a month later, I'm hanging out with those guys, and if I just told that 20 more times, that'd be my whole drinking story. I always knew I had problems, and I drank different than other guys. I put off getting my license until I was 21 because it didn't make any sense getting it because I know I was going to lose it. And like a Crescent in the Great, I had it about 60 days before I lost it. I could see it coming, but I couldn't stop it. And things kind of spiraled from there. I wasn't homeless because I was living in the back seat of somebody else's car. The only time I was homeless is when they went to the store. And I remember it's the middle of summer and life just sucks, right? And some guy from high school pulls up and he's telling me how great a job, hey, I live down on the Oregon coast. I got a great job in a house. If you want, you can come live with me. And I'm like, that sounds a lot better than what I got going, And so we're about halfway there from the Portland area. And he's like, well, Don, I should kind of probably tell you the truth here. It's not really my house. I don't really have a job. I'm kind of watching it for this guy. I was friends with him in the hospital. And I'm like, well, what hospital was this you guys were at? He's like, well, we were together in the hospital at Danish, and that's the mental institution in Oregon. And I think about it, and I'm like, well, hell, that's still better than what I got going. So I went with him, and so now I'm a city boy out in the country in Astoria, Oregon, and I get a job in the ag industry, and life actually got a little better for a few years. I got into the fishing and the outdoor life, and I lived right at the poverty level, which is good for me. Because, when I can only get X amount of alcohol and stuff, I do good when I run out. When I have unlimited supplies, things don't go well for me, So I do that for a couple of years, and then that place goes out of business. And I'm hanging out with my buddy at the bar, and I'm looking for a job. And some other guy's trying to give my buddy a job on a dairy farm, of all things. And I'm like, he don't need a job, I need a job. So I talk my way into it with my golden tongue. And I get this, and all of a sudden, a bunch of the pieces of the puzzle fell in. I found one of the reasons that I was struggling is because this was what I was meant to do. I could do easily with the animals what other guys struggle to do. I just have that sixth sense for it, And life got really good, man. I enjoyed it. I was working in the morning, working at night, and those kind of rules that we make for our drinking, that I'm not going to drink here, I'm not going to drink there, they were working, man. Life was going great. And one day at work, I slipped and injured my back. And they're like, oh, we'll take care of you, and it'll be good. And about 6 months after watching me on pills and whiskey, they said, well, Don, we're glad you're all better, but we don't need you anymore, And so being the good, upstanding guy I was, I grabbed my ex-girlfriend's sister and her kids, and off to a new town because a new job, a new girl, a new town, things are going to be great, right? So I move up north to Ferndale, Washington. You guys heard of that, huh? So, up there, and how water seeks its own level. Alcoholics do too, and I was in hog heaven at this place, man. I was able to drink and party, and things were going really good, and calf feeder showed up, and I liked her more than my girlfriend. So we went that way, and after about a year, we got married. And we were true drinking buddies, man, and we got along well. And I remember we're like, we got to go to a new town. This is not going well with two people that drink like us. And we made those solemn oath promises, right? When we get there, it's only going to be beer and only on the weekends, And it's like within a month, the people at the liquor store know us on a first-name basis because you're always nice to the guy at the liquor store, right? Never kick Santa in the balls, So we're going there, and after 6 months, we got to do the geographical back, right? And now I'm blacking out, passing out, and pissing myself on a regular basis. Things are not going good. And one day I get a call, and there'd been a bad accident with my wife, and someone had pulled out in front of her, and what she saw changed her. And I had no sympathy for that. All I knew was my drinking buddy was gone all of a sudden. And so I started drinking even more, and the farm I was working at that point in time was a family farm, and they thought they could love me through it, And what an enigma we are. I look back at those poor people. I remember one time they called me in the office, and they're like, Don, you don't seem very happy, and things aren't going good, so we thought maybe we'd give you a raise that would help. And I'm like, hell yes, it'll give me a bell. I can go from the bottom shelf to the middle shelf, man. So things are getting worse. The only friends we have at this time are the police. At least they're the only ones that are coming to my house to visit. And they're coming a lot, and they're tired of visiting me. They invited me back to their place. And, as they're processing me, they're asking me if there's any reason I could not be incarcerated, any medical reason. And I've seen people seize out from alcohol. And I knew that it had been at least a year since I'd gone more than 12, 18 hours without a drink. And I knew I was probably going to have a seizure. And I told them my story, and they whisked me away to the Bellingham Hospital. And I told the doctor my long, sad story. And he looked me in the eye and said, you can just come back after you have a seizure. And I had a moment of clarity right then that I could not say he said, she said, they, this, them, that, or the other, man. I knew that the reason I was there and the reason I was going to have these seizures and it was going to go bad was because of my relationship with alcohol, man. I remember I sat in the basement there in the little padded cell, and they'd open up the little window to see if I was doing the fish. And I sat in there and shaked and baked for a couple of days and finally convinced my boss to make bail for me. And so he bailed me out, and he's given me this speech, and I'd had this speech so many times over the years, We love you, Don. The guys love you, Don. You're really good at what you do. And then that long, hard pause. But you got this problem with alcohol, and we're done with it, right? And he says, here's $100. I rented you a room at the Super 8. Come to work in 2 weeks. Don't drink anymore or don't come back. So I went in that room, and I'd been shaking and baking. The sick we know, right? The sick that just us know. And I sat on the edge of that bed, and I could look out the window and I could see the lounge. I could see the Danny's Lounge right there, and I knew what to do, and I knew I had the money in my pocket, man. But instead, I picked up the phone, and I called the Alcoholics Anonymous hotline, and I said, do you know where there's a meeting at, And I remember the gal, she's like, well, there's a young people's meeting just down the road from you, and it just started a little while ago, but I'm sure they'll let you in. And, if you're an alcoholic of my nature, that's 2 really good reasons not to go, right? It's already going, and it's a young people's meeting. And, I have what we know as the gift of desperation, and I went. And when I got there, it was halftime. And they were all out at the docks smoking. It was an hour-and-a-half meeting. It was a 45-minute halftime, and they were smoking, and I come shaking and baking up. And they poured me a half a cup of coffee, and they said some shit. I don't remember much of it. They gave me a big book, and most importantly, they were kind. And they told me to keep coming back. I did go back, and I had a drink that night. But when I woke up that next morning, June the 12th of the year 2000, I did not drink. And I made it all the way to that night, and I went back to that same hall, and when I pulled into the parking lot, these people got arm-flapping happy to come out and see me, man. They're running out to my truck. We can't believe you're back. We didn't think you'd come back, And we know, we've seen that, right? And I couldn't remember the last time people had been happy to see me pulling driveway. It made me feel good, and I made it, and I made it all the way into that second meeting. And somewhere in that middle of the meeting came that peace and comfort that had only come before with the drink, right? And it was quick, it was whoosh. But I felt at peace, and I'm like, oh, this is good, man. And you guys spoke in a language that I hadn't heard, but I understood. And you talked about weird stuff like a home group and sponsorship and this and that and the other. And, I just kept coming back. You guys told me I should get a sponsor. And I remember the first guy I asked, I was devastated when he said no. And I asked another guy, and he said yes. And I look back now, and I understand that it was God turning the gears, right? And he told me that the caveat that I still tell guys to this day, I don't get to or have to live with any of your decisions, so don't expect them to make them for you. But I can help you learn some options, and I can help you make better decisions. He started to take me through the big book. At the big book study, surprisingly enough. Good place to do a big book study. And, I remember I was going for it, and things seemed pretty good, and the court system suggested I go to a treatment center. I remember when I went there, and I was totally honest with them, and I told them my story of the drinking story, and it was the first time I'd ever heard it out loud, right? When you say it, and it's really clear and really loud. And I'm like, oh man, I bet I'm screwed. And I remember the counselor, well, you're gonna have to go to AA, and you're gonna have to get a higher power. I'm like, oh, that was tough because I've been to organized religion, and what I saw in the parking lot and what I saw in the building were 2 different things. So I had the big block up against that, but one more time, I had enough of the gift of desperation that I went. And, by doing that and going through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, things started to change. And you guys started to change me too. I remember, I don't think I was even legally sober, and they gave me a service position. They told me I was the literature guy. So that meant I had to service all the literature racks in the county. And they're like, Don, you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You need to act like it now. When you pull in the parking lot, you need to park like you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You might be the only person, the only big book somebody sees. They just 12-stomped the shit out of me, man. They said, we know that, you think it's fun to park up front, but you're a tough guy. You can go park in the corner of the parking lot. Leave the parking spots up front for the women and the elderly. They started teaching me to behave in a way that I can reflect upon and be proud of before I even realized what they were doing. They said, you put that AA sticker on your truck, you better act like you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, they were doing that stuff, and it's catching me, and it's going further and further out of the halls, right? And the next thing I know, I'm up way too late from a meeting, and I'm reading the big book, and I'm sure I've drank way too much coffee. That's why I can't sleep. And I'm thinking I'm falling apart. They're telling me I'm on fire. And I'm reading the spiritual appendix, and as I'm reading it, I can recognize that these things have happened to me, that I've actually had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, you know, and I can finally see it in my reflection, and I'm like, I just might make this deal, man. You know, and so life gets good, and, you know, things are going. That place that I'm working at, I remember when I quit drinking, they were building me an office in the back corner that people couldn't find. And after a couple of years, they made me manager. You know, and then things went bad, and they made me the deal. They said, you know, if you stay and you turn it around, we'll make you part owner. And I got to work with the bank on that deal, and you know, it's interesting that by that time I was no longer literature, I was a public information, and we were working on the district website. So I got a computer and I got an email and all this fancy stuff. It sounds funny now, but back in 2001, that was advanced stuff, right? And so, you know, I got all that stuff, and, you know, it ended up not going real well. But I went through there, and I got to take the summer off, and I had some money, and I got to do a bunch of the stuff that we sit on the bar stool and talk about, right? Got to take some exotic vacations. I got to go and spend a significant amount of time with my family so they could meet sober Don for the first time. You know, and life was really good. And at the end of that summer, the bank called me back up, and they said, hey, Don, we've got another farm that's not playing near as nice as your farm did. Would you like to go work for us and help them through their thing? And I thought, sure, this will be a great opportunity, right? Well, it turned out that it was several farms in several different counties. It was a huge job. It was actually the largest cattle liquidation in Western Washington history at the time. And I go there, and apparently nobody sent these employees the memo that I'm a nice guy, because I got there, and all they knew is I worked for the bank, and they were mean to me. I don't know why that's funny, but they were mean. And gosh, and I'm going, and I'm hitting the meetings that are there, and I'm not hearing what I think I need to hear. And I'm going home on the weekends, and I'm talking to my sponsor, and I remember my sponsor, you know, thank God for good sponsorship, right? He's like, Don, those people are all living in fear. You were just through that. You should have some empathy and sympathy here, right? And all of a sudden, it didn't bother me when they were mean to me anymore. And he said, keep going to meetings, and you'll find the shoe that fits. And sure enough, somebody walks up to me at one of those meetings that I don't know how they were staying sober, but there was people there with long-term sobriety. And they said, Don, why don't you go hit this meeting? And I remember I hit that meeting. It was the Thursday night Rochester meeting. And I walked into there, and it was like walking into my home group, man. Remember the huge lesson of there's a home group everywhere for me if I look for it, right? And so I go through there, and I get all done with that, and I go back, and things are on and off again with my wife, and you know, I decide I need to change home groups. At that time, I thought my home group had changed. Now I realize I have. And I got to go on a look for a new home group in my area. And I remember I was at this meeting, and as this one woman spoke, I swear I could hear the pages of the big book turning. And I knew I'd found my new home, right? And so I'm going there, and these old guys, I'd seen them around, and they'd seen me, because I'm pretty fun to watch, I hear. And, hey, we get together, we have dinner before the meeting. Do you want to come join this? And you know, my ego that gets there 5 minutes before me is like, oh, these guys need to have some fun at dinner, you know? And I go and I have dinner with these guys, and there's 4 of them, and they tell me that they'd been doing this every week for over 20 years. And that was their core group, and they'd all stayed sober together, and they kind of sat there and sponsored each other. And I learned about a core group there, and I went to these guys for the next several years, and I learned about true sobriety from the neck up, right? I mean, in the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous, we talk about what it's like in a general way, right? When with your sponsor and when you're with your core group, you talk in an exact way. And if you've got the right people sitting across from you, they call you out when you're not being honest, right? And they can see it in your eyes. I sat there and I went with these guys, and I watched. That's when the economy wasn't good. I watched businesses suffer. I watched a guy go on a trip to visit his kid, and he came off the plane disabled. Another guy lost his wife. And these guys did this in a way that they could reflect upon and be proud of. And I'm like, this is it. This is a real deal. This is sobriety, right? And during this time also, I ended up getting divorced. And of course, I'm thinking, I'm single in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is going to be great. Because there's no place to go get a used car than a wrecking yard, right? And I absolutely include myself in that statement, right? So after going through that punishment for a little while, I meet a girl, and she's ignoring me, and I tell her, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, do you have a book? Sure, I got a book. And I handed her the book, and she beat me over the head with that thing for the next 2 years. Where does it say that in the book? Would you do that in front of a newcomer? Oh my goodness. It's absolutely good for me, right? The best thing about she taught me, though, was about the dance. And you guys have all done the dance. You might not know it. We're at the county fair, and about half the people I'm introducing her to are people in the ag industry, and the other half are people in the program, right? And so I'm telling her, program, and she said, just stop. Oh, I can tell. When you guys see each other, you get all excited. And then you're like, I'm okay. And you're like, are you sure you're okay? Like you're going to go grab your AA cape out of the trunk of your car and save them. You know what? You're goddamn right we will, right? I've done that dance more times than I can. We do that dance at stoplights, man. And it changes your day, right? I'd done it, I just didn't know how obvious it was to other people. So we're doing that, and that kind of comes to an end. God starts jabbing me with a pretty sharp stick. I lose my job. He's telling me I need to change, right? And I'm like, oh, no, I just need to get another job, and blah, blah, blah. And it's jabbing me with a sharp stick, and I can't get a job in the area for shit. There's other people that are less qualified getting jobs. So, okay, I'm going to do, and I got some sober history now, right? And I use that sober history, and I start to network, and eventually I contact somebody, and they're like, hey, yeah, we do, and there's going to be another guy, he's going to call you next week. And so I get this phone call, and I arrange a job back in Oregon, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll go back down there. That'll be great, And I get there, and I know this guy, right? But I can't figure out where I know him from, and we're talking, and this and that. And so he was a manager on one of those farms that I did the bankruptcy for. And my first thought is, well, I guess I'm screwed. They made fun of me. But my next thought is, no, wait a minute. I followed advice. I acted in a way that I can reflect upon and be proud of, right? And so I get this job, and it's actually not just a regular job. There was a big organic company, and the farms were just their little showpieces. So I go there, and I move back, and it's a really good job, and it's got really good benefits that guys like me don't get, right? And all of a sudden I got like really good health insurance, and I moved down to Oregon, and it gives me a chance to hook up with some people from the past and make amends that I hadn't been able to. And so I remember I called up this one girl, and hey, you were a really good friend to me, and I really wasn't a good friend back because I couldn't be. And she says, well, I don't remember none of that, but I could sure use a good friend now. And so, like a month later, she's living with me. Because we're alcoholic, right? She's not, but I sure as hell am. But, and I get to bring this person that never been around recovery, that had been around alcoholism her whole life, into the recovery world, right? And when I moved, they told me stuff like, Don, it's important to go to a meeting before you go to the grocery store, and I followed those directions. They told me that I was not going to like AA where I was moving to because there'd never be anywhere like where I got sober, and they were right. They told me I needed to keep going until I fell in love with it, and I listened, right? So within a couple of months, I'm just in love with Alcoholics Anonymous down there, man. And the next thing you know, I've got a core group where we're hanging out, we're going to the restaurants, we're doing all the do's, right? I remember looking around the business meeting one time and realizing these are all the people I hang out with, birds of a feather flock together. So we're hanging out, life is really good. And I have a couple of health incidences, I'd known that I had hepatitis, and they didn't take care of it. I ended up getting a stent. But then they come out with a new hepatitis drug, and I end up becoming just obsessed with getting this prescription for this. And they're like, don't worry, we'll get it for you. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I want this now. And so I push it, and I end up getting the corporation that makes it to gift me like $60,000 of this drug. And I remember after the first 3 days, I take it, and I felt better than I have in like 20 years, right? And then it starts to go downhill rapidly for the next month or so. And about 3 days before that 30 days is up, they bring this load of wild beef cows to the farm. And they're like jumping over these 6-foot fences. And we spent the day, I chased some of them chased me. It was a kind of a terrifying ordeal, right? And I wake up the next day, and my leg's blown out, I can barely walk. But the inside of my chest just hurts like I cannot describe, man. It felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a hammer. And through good sponsorship, which at one time had told me something like, Don, if something doesn't seem right, it's probably not. You should go see a doctor. So I go and I see my doctor, and and I remember being irritated because she had a very thick accent, and I had a hard time understanding her. She goes and she says, oh, just go get an x-ray and do this, and you're getting old. You probably shouldn't chase cows anymore, Like 3 days later, I'm in my office, and she calls. And I remember I got to run outside because my office has got terrible, terrible phone reception. And I run outside so that I can hear her and listen to her, and she's like, Don, you've got cancer. We see it on your x-ray. You've got lung cancer. Do not delay. Get this treated. And I'm just in shock, man. And I remember I Google on my phone, lung cancer survivability, and it was and it is 15% at 5 years. So I'm like, well, I'm going to die. So I call up my sponsor, and the first thing he said was shit, which is never good, right? And then the next thing he says, well, I guess you get to show people how to do this thing sober. And if I haven't made it clear yet, let me make it clear one more time. He's talking about sober from the neck up, right? Act in a way that you can reflect upon and be proud of no matter what. We don't coddle anybody, man. Life on life's terms ain't for candy asses, man. So I hang up the phone from him, and I call my boss. That guy that I was sober when I did that, I ended up getting the job from. And he said, John, don't worry. We got good insurance. You got long-term health leave. We will take care of you. Your job now is to get sober. God was getting all these pieces in place for me. So I go home to that girl that I made amends to, and I tell her. She hugs me and tells me she loves me and says there's nothing we can't get through together, right? I got to go to my home group and tell them, because you can't save your face in your ass, you know. And, I didn't know what to do, but the people of Alcoholics Anonymous sure as hell did, man. And they loved on me like I cannot describe, man. Those people blew up my phone 24/7. Whether it was from people up north from my original home groups or the people down south at my new ones, they gave me no time off, man. They just loved on me, and they cared through me, and God showed up in spades. I remember the nurse called me up, and she says, I'm calling you because when someone gets a diagnosis like yours, we want to make sure that you have a support group. And my answer to her was, I've got long-term sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she's like, well, that's nice, but do you have a support group? Outside of these halls, people don't get it, right? I absolutely knew how well loved I was, right? And then God put a newcomer in my life, and, they'd call me up bitching they were going through a divorce, and you believe what that so-and-so did? And I got to say, I'm so glad your kid's got a sober parent. Because as a result of my divorce having a sober parent, today, I've got grandkids that haven't seen me drink. As a result of my sober divorce, I got to walk my daughter down the aisle that one time they put in protective care from me. When that marriage blew up, she called me crying because she knows who is going to answer the phone. Sober dad. And those things made me resolute that I was going to be both of these things. I remember sitting in the back room of the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous with my hair falling out, and people like, shouldn't you be at home? And I'm like, why? I'm not going to beat cancer to die alcoholism, man. I need to treat both these things still. I remember asking my oncologist, would you guys been able to treat me as viciously as you were treating this if my hepatitis wasn't cured? And she said, no, you're so lucky that happened. Is it God or is it odd, I know what it is for me, right? So I went through that. It was a total of 3 different surgeries and 4 chemo and radiation. There's a million different stories I could tell you about all of that. None of it was pleasant, But the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, they'd send newcomers to take me to meetings, and then they'd 12-step me on the way there, They're telling me their woes, It was just freaking great. It took me a couple of years to get better from all of that. About 3 years, and at that time we'd moved, come to another area a little further south, and, I did the same thing, go to meetings till you love them in the new area. Have a core group. Be with people that you're accountable to. You can't have integrity and not have integrity, right? And there's some of the stuff, some of my favorite lines in the big book are, you can believe anything these men tell you about themselves. And we will talk to you about things both spiritual and moral. So I try to live by those things as I'm going out and doing those. And so I'm back to work, and the company had separated up, and they built a couple of dream farms. One was a huge merry-go-round thing that milked 70 cows at a time, and one was a purely robotic farm. So now I'm managing both of those farms, and it just got chaotic, man. I had to call them up and say, this is too much for me physically. Can we do something else? Yeah, we don't think so, and this and that, and everything in life is for a reason, a season, and a lifetime, right? And so, even though they got me through the cancer, and I had fears. I still get fears. Oh no, what if I can't do a job anywhere else? And I had to put my faith in God and fear at the same time. And I had to change careers. And instead of managing dairies, now I found a job at a place where we actually install dairy equipment and stuff. And so now I get to do that, and I get to drive around, and I spend most of my time driving rather than the physical work, and I get to consult and do stuff. God puts everything in my life for a reason, and it's great, you know. And I found my new home group. It's the Kaiser Big Book Group in Salem, Oregon. It turns out that people that get up at 8 in the morning to go to a big book study are my people. You know, if you're ever out of town and want to find a meeting of people that are serious about Alcoholics Anonymous, go to a literature study, right? And so I go there, and those are my people, and I've got a home group, and I've got a service position. And, you know, I do all these things for the same reason that Bill did it, right? Because it's an honor and a privilege, and I owe it to the next person. And you know, it's amazing to me that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous on a summer night 23 and a half years ago because I wanted my life to suck less. If I could go to these crappy little meetings and my name's Don, I'm an alcoholic, and my life sucks, but at least I didn't drink today. And you guys would clap for me. And some other poor bastard, that he'd say the same thing, and I'd go home to a shitty existence. I was absolutely good with that, right? For me to come here and to have the life that I have today, where I'm loved, liked, and respected, I've got a relationship with a God that is just, you know, it's second to none, right? It's like, you know where it says in the big book, wherever two or more alcoholics are gathered for the purpose of sobriety, there's a presence of God. You know, I count on that now. I remember a time where I'd be like, oh no, what am I going to say? You know, when I go meet with my new sponsor or whatever, what am I going to say? Now I know God's going to say it all for me, right? I know God's been through me, and I remember the first time someone said, God's not going to bring you this far to drop you on your ass, you know, and I'm thinking, F you, you know. You don't know what my God's done to me. You know, what I know is that I do these 12 things that didn't make a whole lot of sense for an end result that I couldn't comprehend, and as a result of that, I'm always the luckiest guy in the room, and that's why I want to thank you all for my sobriety.